Hey everyone, I wanted to give you an example for your project. What could you possibly be doing in terms of diagramming, in terms of articles that you would be looking for, in terms of interpreting some of this news and some of this data based on what you know, for what you've learned and the tools that you've learned about that can be used for macro policy, the stuff that you've learned in this class. So I'm going to look at the Polish economy. And I'm going to look at this economy in two phases. I'm going to look at the first one that is March 1st to March 16th. So as the coronavirus was unfolding here and kind of the wave was settling in. And then I'm going to look at this one, the second one, March 16th to the present. So this is the response phase. So when the government can recognize what's going to happen, how are they going to then use those macroeconomic tools to respond to what they're seeing? Okay, so first thing, I'll show you the articles that I have gotten, and then you can kind of decide for yourself what they mean, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint here. Okay. I picked a few different articles. The first three you can see there, and I picked those because this is kind of leading up to what's going on. Two things. First, Poland to close schools as of Monday due to coronavirus. And you might kind of think, wow, that's got to be affecting the overall economy, right? If Poland's going to close the schools and so forth. And it will. Kind of. What's going to happen here is the school is going to close, and so all the kids are going to be, I don't know what, going home or something. But does it actually affect the economy? And the shorter answer is no, not really. Schools, they are businesses, but they are government businesses. So what that's going to mean for the schools is that teachers, staff, whatever, they still get paid. So those people are still receiving a salary, and effectively the business is still running, even though a lot of the students are not going to be in school. Now, who knows? That may have a long-run effect. You might see something like the long-run aggregate supply changing over time because students are less educated or something, but at this point we can say no real change is going to happen there, but it is kind of moving towards the change that we'll see. The second article here, this one has to do with the flow of goods between Poland and Germany specifically, but just in general. So Poland closed the borders, and that must have been, I would say, on the 16th or something like that. They announced that they were going to close the borders to all foreign travel, and only Polish citizens could come in, and they had to quarantine and so forth. So you can see this long line of trucks here. That is the truckers trying to get into Poland from Germany. All right, so what is going to happen here as the flow of goods starts to slow down? What we should see in our macro diagram is this effect here. So what's going to happen? Well, if the border is closed, two things are going to happen. First, we're going to see a lot of disruptions in the supply chain because there's a lot of trucks sitting at the border, or goods and services just can't really travel through the border, or whatever it might be. So probably we're going to see initially some of this type of shift. The SRAS shifting over as firms decide that in the short run they're going to cut back on their capacity, either because the inputs aren't getting there and so they have to slow down production, or perhaps they are getting there but it's taking longer and it's more expensive and so forth. Right? So the inputs to those firms go up in cost, and so they start to pull back. What that also means, though, is that there are fewer people who are working. And this has been something which kind of follows. I don't have an article there about it, but people start to get laid off, especially those workers who are not on salary but are wage workers or hourly workers. So shops start to close by decree or otherwise. And so what we start to see is a reduction in consumption and AD going down. Because consumption is going down. So in our economy, there's really two things happening here in Poland. First thing, we're going from what I'm just going to assume is the full employment level, at this equilibrium here, and we're going to move. So at first we're going to move this way to say that this is a new equilibrium, and we start to see some unemployment of resources, and we start to see a threat to GDP. GDP could be going down, growth could be going down. In the second phase, as consumption goes down, again, we're going to see a movement, but this time because of AD. And so we're going to see less employment of resources again, a decrease in real GDP again. And in this case, we don't really know too much about the price level, but we can assume that there's going to be some volatility here in the price level as this kind of unfolds. But what the Polish government is looking at this time is that consumption is down and stores, shops, and so forth are closed. And so there's going to be a big impact to the economy. You would expect the GDP to be reduced or maybe even negative, maybe a recession. So then the question becomes, how does the government respond to that? Well, they can respond in a couple of different ways. So first, Poland's government pledged to spend $50 billion to alleviate the coronavirus. And you can see some of that stuff here, what they're going to do. There was a few different things that were suggested by the government, one of which was to just give cash handouts to people, one of which was to give cash to people who have kids, a few different ideas. But no matter which way you cut it, the government's going to spend that $50 billion. The other thing that they decided to do was to cut rates. And this is the central bank, not the government necessarily. This is the central bank of the country. They're going to cut rates. And it says here, you can see, sorry, this is from March 17th. So this is over the weekend there. The central bank is cutting its rate from 1.5 to 1% in response to the pandemic. Well, what does that mean? Why would they do that? Well, they're working together with the government. There's really two different things that are going on here. First thing, the government's going to implement some of that fiscal policy. They're going to spend that money. And why are they going to do that? Well, because AD isn't here. It's not at full employment level. AD is back here. So we're assuming that this AD curve is actually going to be much lower, maybe something like this, versus our full employment level. And so real GDP is going to be lower than it otherwise could be. Now, if that's the case, the government's going to step in with that fiscal policy. So we'll probably see an initial boost to AD because of government spending. Right? Remember that AD is composed of consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. And so if we have all of those things happening at the same time, consumption, investment, government, net exports increasing, that's going to increase our AD curve. But now it's just government. So government's going to spend. What do they spend on? Well, they spend on putting money into people's hands mostly, but maybe some other stuff too, maybe some investment stuff. People will spend that money at a shop, on rent, whatever it is. That spending is someone else's income, right? So when you go and buy a hamburger from McDonald's, that's an income for the person who owns the McDonald's, who can then pay their workers and so forth. It ripples out. That's what's called the Keynesian spending multiplier. So even though our AD curve shifts initially from AD to AD2, later on, we're probably going to see a couple smaller additional AD curves going forward as that ripples out into the economy. Yeah, which means we're going to be getting closer and closer to that full employment level again. But that's kind of it. Like the government injection, they're hoping to maybe slow down the fall and get it closer to full employment again. But they need to join together with the central bank, right? And when they join together with the central bank, they're engaging in both fiscal And now monetary policy. The monetary policy of cutting the interest rate, what that's going to do is it's going to signal. It's going to signal to businesses, it's going to signal to consumers that you can take a loan more easily. The market for money is more liquid, and you don't necessarily have to worry about credit. It's signaling to everybody that the credit markets are still liquid. There's plenty of cash to go around. What is that probably going to mean for our economy? Well, at least at first, it's probably going to mean that we're going to have another AD boost. And why is that? Because of investment. People are taking a loan to invest in something. It might be businesses taking that loan to invest in something. That investment, depending on what it is a possibility that eventually it will also make it to the SRAS curve. So what that is going to mean for us then too is that SRAS curve is also pushing towards that full employment level, but maybe lowering prices a little bit. Because if you invest in factors of production, expanding businesses and so forth, that means it's going to be easier and cheaper for them to operate. So the Polish government is trying all of these policies to try to go from where we started initially through these different equilibriums in order that eventually they're going to get to, let's just call that E, I don't know, what was it, 5? To get to E5 so that they can get closer to their old full employment level. So to recap, initially what we see in this market is AD falling, SRAS falling, so our equilibrium is going 1, 2, 3. What does it tell us? GDP is going down, unemployment is rising, and generally in the economy we're going to see malaise. Animal spirits will be low, people aren't going to feel confident. So they're not going to correct the economy. They're not going to start spending again immediately. What does that mean has to happen? Well, then the government has to step in. And they have, with both fiscal and monetary policy. And you're probably going to see this in a lot of other countries too. So first, they're going to have government spending to boost that AD. That's going to ripple out into the economy. So people will spend a little bit more incomes, more spending, more incomes, more spending. And eventually, they're going to join with the central banks to have monetary policy to lower an interest rate, which is going to cause more investment and eventually probably make it into SRAS to push forward. So that's the plan. That's what Poland is trying to do. Now we're still here on today, March 23rd. And so we don't know for sure what's going to happen, but that is the intention. And that's how fiscal and monetary policy work in trying to pull the levers of our economy.